Today on Locked On Phoenix Suns, we go back into the time machine to April to look at what really went wrong during the Suns' sweep at the hands of the Minnesota Timberwolves and if it was actually as bad as we remember. Let's go.
You are Locked On Suns, your daily Phoenix Suns podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
And we're back. This is Locked On Phoenix Suns, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I'm Brendon Kleen, your host and a credentialed media member covering the Suns for the past 7 seasons and the host and a writer at Awful Announcing. Welcome in. Thank you for making Locked On Suns your first listen to kick off your week. It's great to be back with you. It has been a while. I moved my little sister into NAU, and then I did an episode not solo. Feels like it's been weeks. Maybe it has. Hit follow or subscribe, guys, if you haven't already. We are free and available for you everywhere you get your podcasts, including YouTube. So just hit that button, get a new episode in your feed Monday, Wednesday, and Friday for the rest of this week. And we're back to daily next week, up all the way through the rest of the season. We have a big announcement coming. Can't wait to get to all of that with you guys. But again, become an everydayer by hitting that button and get locked onto the Phoenix Suns to start every day. We'll get to the film. I went back and watched through games 1, 2, and 3 of the Suns Timberwolves series. Is something I've wanted to be doing for this whole offseason. Finally found some time and what it all really means. But let's start with the big picture here as we look back at this sweep. Of course, it was ugly. I don't think you need me to tell you that, right? The Suns were outscored by 60 points overall when it was all said and done. And I have a lot of observations looking back at the stats and the film. Today's episode brought to you by Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, use the code LOCKEDONNBA for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Download Gametime today. What time is it? Gametime. All right. So, big picture here. I think the number one reason that the Suns lost this series, and there's a lot of them, is that when it came down to it, in the biggest moments, and that's important to say, Anthony Edwards outperformed Devin Booker and Kevin Durant. Now, that's reductive, right? I hate doing the one superstar outplayed the other because there's so much context that goes into that. There just is, right? How's the floor spaced? Well, the floor has to be spaced for the best player to go to work, and that has to happen when the role players are making shots. Are there playmakers on the court that are setting up the best player? Is that player getting open opportunities for baskets with good pace because the defense is working well? Of course, all of that matters. And a lot of those things, frankly, went in Ant's favor in this series. And yet, at a basic level, Anthony Edwards had put up 31, 8, and 6 with 2 steals a game on 51% shooting from the field in this series. Booker, 28, 3, and 6. Kevin Durant, 27, 7, and 3. Look, KD was very, very good. Book, very good, maybe a little worse. Ant was better. And I'll get to some of this in the next segment, but I think the reason that ended up really mattering, even that little bit of difference from 27 to 31 points from, Booker at 49% efficiency and Ant at 51, is the Suns just panicked. The Suns just panicked, and they started to overreact to how good Ant was. And so they ended up really shooting themselves in the foot as a result of it. The other thing is the Wolves were just as good with their best players off the court. And they were able to keep the momentum that Ant and Cat created when they were playing at their best, and they almost did not miss a beat. And so you had Ant doing his thing. You had Cat in particular moments really making his presence felt, but then the Suns were never able to make their responses. They were never able to make a run in response because the Wolves bench was just so good. In particular, Nickeil Alexander-Walker and Naz Reid. And the Suns were just a team that didn't have any answers to stop the Wolves at the end of the day. And that sounds obvious, right? Of course. I mean, that's all these things are things that you say when a team loses a playoff series, but I mean it very literally. And not just when it comes to like scheme, X's and O's. Yes, schematically they just were drawing blanks, but at the same time, their energy just didn't have an answer. They couldn't respond to the level of physicality and energy that Minnesota was putting forth. You know, obviously the Wolves, let me get this out of the way now. The Wolves were better and more overwhelming as an opponent in playoff time than any of us thought. Now, I'm not the type that's going to sit here and tell you that that makes it all okay, and it definitely doesn't mean that this upcoming season or the off season and all the things that have to be better now get graded on a curve because, oh, actually, Minnesota was really good, so the Suns' loss to them is not quite as bad. It is. It's ugly, and it wasn't just a loss, it was a sweep. So I'm not trying to get that out of the way. That said, Denver in Game 3 responded. Nikola Jokic put together one of his best games ever. After going down 0-2 at home, Denver responded. And the Suns just couldn't. They didn't have any scheme adjustments that worked, and they never brought it at the same level as the Wolves. However, okay, so I say all of that, not making any excuses. The Suns were outscored by 60 points overall across these 4 games. That is, on average, getting blown out by 15 tonight. And it really kind of was like that. There was only one close game, basically. It was a 6, only one of them. It just totally was after type of series. And yet, a lot of the stats don't paint this as quite so ugly. It really was just a situation of the Suns kind of rolling over, right? I would say a few stats I could point to that tell the story here, and you have to go pretty deep to find them. The Wolves rebounded the living hell out of the basketball, especially on the offensive end. They nearly doubled their offensive rebounding rate from the regular season to this first round series. And in large part as a result of that, their offensive rating jumped up 11 points. This was a middle of the pack offense in the regular season, Minnesota's was. And they got even better in the playoffs, which is the opposite of what tends to happen. At the same time, the Suns' pace dropped about 6 possessions per game. The Wolves, all pace drops in the playoffs. That's bound to happen, but the Wolves only dropped by about 4 possessions per game. So Minnesota was able to not only create extra possessions in the half court, but get out and score in transition even more than normal, even more than the Suns were, and bolster their overall offensive efficiency as a result of that. The Suns only shot 53% at the rim in the first 2 games. That was ugly. And the main culprits of that were both Bradley Beal and Yusuf Nurkic. And maybe not quite, nobody's smoking dunks out here, but it was the non-restricted area little bunnies and floaters. Bradley Beal shot 44% from 2-point range, and both he and Nurkic were in the low 20s on floater, basically 3 to 10 foot shots. And Beal had nearly as many turnovers as assists. If you're looking at a player, it's him. Yes, I said at the top, Anthony Edwards outplayed Booker and Kevin Durant in the biggest moments of the series. When Minnesota would go on a run, oftentimes it was Ant punctuating that run with a big shot, a big forced turnover, a big dunk in transition, things like that. And that added up over the course of the series. But on the negative side, the Wolves didn't really have anybody play poorly. The Suns had several players, but Beal, of their best guys, did not live up to what he needed to. And so when you add all of that up, Minnesota upping their game, controlling the possession game in a lot of ways, having better depth, and the Suns' best 3 players, but especially Beal, falling short, and the team making a lot of mental mistakes, that's how these games go the way that they did. If you don't have a punch to throw back in the playoffs, you're going to lose by double digits because teams are playing their best guys more. They're not, waving the white flag at the ends of these games with backups to let you make the final score look better than really the game was. None of that stuff happens. If you lose in every facet of the game, it gets ugly, even if some things did go your way. And I think that's what the story was here. Now, I went back and watched so that I'm not just talking from box scores. And I'll tell you why the offense was actually the bigger problem, even though I just told you Minnesota's offense went up. How's that possible? We'll break it down coming up next. First, today's show brought to you by the Gametime app. Man, I love the Gametime app. I bought tickets. I told you to buy them. I hope you did. To the D-backs Dodgers game on Labor Day. They are still running a 50% off deal. They also have a new feature called Gametime Picks that makes getting tickets for your favorite live events even easier. Gametime Picks filters out the fluff to show you only incredible deals on great seats so you don't have to waste time searching through thousands of tickets. So, obviously, if you're either visiting in the Valley during Labor Day, although I would assume you're not crazy enough to deal with that heat, but if you live here and you go to Gametime online or on their app and you don't even have to do anything because it'll know you live here, it tells you right at the top, this D-backs Dodgers game has great deals on it. And then when you click in at the top, before you even scroll to look at what the deals and seats and options are, it puts the best deals at the top for you. It doesn't make you pick them, and it's not just in certain areas. It's every seat that is really, really cheap right there. So you click in, and it'll be a lower level seat for half off. It'll be an upper level seat for 20% off, but it's only $15. That type of thing sorted for you, filtered for you with the Gametime Picks. No better deal, no better time than that D-backs Dodgers game, Monday, September 2nd, a week from when you're listening to this. So take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, use the code LOCKEDONNBA for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account, redeem the code LOCKEDONNBA for $20 off. Download Gametime today. What time is it? Gametime. And we're back. Let's keep it rolling here. Film breakdown time. Everybody's favorite. Okay, so I watched through the first 3 games on the all possessions setting on NBA.com, and it, from an energy and fight standpoint, it was absolutely as ugly as I remembered it. And I really think that tells a lot of the story of this series. And honestly, watching a lot of this back and seeing the lack of fight and spirit was just a reminder that Frank Vogel did in fact need to go. The other thing that was a reminder that Frank Vogel needed to go, and the main reason from just a how the games played out standpoint, again, watching it back and really experiencing it again, is that the Suns just did not run any offense. They were not running anything. Too much single screen, 0 pass possessions. Booker dribbles up. Somebody sets a high screen for him. We know that the point of attack defense for Minnesota was exemplary, so Suns ball handlers did not get any penetration off of that first screen, and it would be settling for a jumper or a really difficult attempt at the rim, praying that they either got fouled or made a miracle shot. And that was just it over and over. Jusuf Nurkic had the worst series I can remember any Suns player having, unfortunately, and he was being used on both ends, frankly. Jusuf Nurkic was being used very strangely. I'll get to some of that in a second, but on the offensive end, the dribble handoff game and perimeter playmaking from their center spot that the Suns had done pretty nicely to integrate over the course of the regular season just disappeared. Not that I'm saying the key to the Suns winning this whole thing would have been to put the ball in Nurkic's hands more, but the reality is that's how they were playing. So the fact that it wasn't in his hands even at all, even a little bit, shows that they just got completely away from not only what had been working, but what they were comfortable with. And instead, they just started playing playground basketball. Your turn, my turn, tough jumpers, a hooper's dream, except in this case, it was a hooper's nightmare because the shots just weren't going in. Okay? So, no fight, no spirit, no offense. Yeah, the coach needed to go. And the byproduct of that offense, where it was just ISO stuff and everything else, is that when they got bottled up, when Booker or Durant or Beal got bottled up, it was either going to be a bad shot attempt or a turnover. And the trickle of that is, you're letting the other team get out and run. And that's the one thing you cannot do with Minnesota. It doesn't really, I'm trying not to harp on the Minnesota side of this so much just because the odds that the Suns are going to play that team again are very low. It's just a luck of the draw type of thing. But part of why it does matter is, remember, the Suns were supposed to be favored against, they were favored against this team. They were supposed to win. And by just coughing the ball up and chucking up bad shots so frequently and missing shots around the rim the way that they did, especially in the first two games, they allowed a mediocre offensive team in the Timberwolves to become a good offensive team, a great offensive team. And that's all just self-inflicted on the Suns' part. Defensively, back to Nurkic. This has been the thing that has stuck with me the most, that I'm sure you've heard me say even before doing this whole exercise on this episode, as we've talked back about that series over the course of the summer, which is that the Suns just panicked when it came to their defensive coverages. I really think that they started to treat Anthony Edwards like a legend in a way that he just had not earned. And while this, because of how deep Minnesota went, this postseason was kind of the Anthony Edwards breakout, in the end, it wasn't the massive explosion that I think, it felt like in the moment. He was inconsistent. It was not impossible to stop him. He could look human sometimes, right? If I go to the playoffs and look at his game log, he had 15 points in game 2, and yet the Suns still treated him like, some kind of superstar out there. And yeah, he, 40 points in the closeout game against the Suns, 43 in game 1 against Denver. But in that game 3 against Denver, when Jokic went crazy, Ant only had 19 points, 18 points in a game 5 loss. And then, in a couple of games against Dallas, he was around 20 points and bad efficiency. So, he had games with turnovers of 5, 6 routinely. And yet the Suns were treating him like he's, literally Michael Jordan and almost like listening to that hype around Ant. And I just think that they stretched themselves way too thin. They went into the series knowing that they did not have backline rim protection, and yet they started to bring their defense so far out to take away Anthony Edwards' pull-up threes and, drives to the basket and everything way too quickly, especially given that the result of that was that the rotations were a lot longer and more difficult. And then, we go back to that depth where you watch and they're giving Jaden McDaniels so much space. They're letting Nickeil Alexander-Walker do whatever he wants with the ball in his hands. And they're almost underreacting to that while overreacting to Ant going off. And that is just not going to work. It's not going to work. Jaden McDaniels crashing the offensive glass. Nobody can box him out. They're giving him way too much space on jumpers and then to attack closeouts. It's something like nobody was in his face on the catch at all. Nickeil Alexander-Walker, it's like, yeah, early in the series, if he's bombing pull-up threes, you're kind of going to let him take that shot, but he was making it, and they didn't really do anything about it, right? And so Jusuf Nurkic not playing well, being part of that overreaction schematically on the defensive end. Grayson Allen ends up injured. Royce O'Neal goes cold from deep. They're overreacting to Ant and underreacting to those guys and not running any offense. That's kind of the structural side of why things got so ugly in this series and why in the end, you're talking about a sweep. So do I think that they got beaten as bad as a negative 60-point differential over the course of a series? I do not. Now, that's easier to do when you don't win a game. Like, that's kind of what a sweep will do to you. But from a standpoint of their competitive spirit and the roster concerns, I think it was just as ugly as we remember it being. And that's kind of what matters the most. So let's talk about what these lessons need to mean for the Suns to not end up in this position by next year's postseason. Coming up next. First, today's show brought to you by the FanDuel Sportsbook, the official sportsbook of the Locked On Podcast Network and America's number one sportsbook. We have something a little different for you right now. Through September 22nd, all FanDuel customers can bet $5 and get a 3-week free trial of NFL Sunday Ticket from YouTube and YouTube TV. Then with the YouTube TV base plan, you'll be able to watch every regular season Sunday afternoon out-of-market game. All you need is a Google account and a current form of payment, and you can cancel anytime. So it really is as simple as it sounds. Put $5 down on something. Maybe you like here. Let's get the Cardinals week 1 odds. I believe it was 6.5. Let's see if it's changed. It is still 6.5. Dogs on the road. Early game. You got Buffalo fully healthy. Josh Allen hasn't taken a hit yet in a year. It might get ugly there. Kind of do like the over 48.5, though. I feel like the Cardinals are going to come out a little more aggressive than maybe they were with their scheme early last season. They're also healthy, of course. Kyler is back fully. Put a little money down, but it doesn't really matter because either way, you're getting 3 weeks of YouTube and NFL Sunday Ticket from YouTube and YouTube TV. So just visit FanDuel.com/LockedOn, figure out what you want to put your $5 down on, and watch 3 weeks of NFL Sunday Ticket. Visit FanDuel.com/LockedOn to get started and download America's number one sportsbook. Closing out the show, let's go here. Lessons. What does this mean? Why does this matter? I go back to Vogel first and foremost, right? The level of quit that I feel like this team showed when Minnesota got going in these games is hard to come back from, especially considering we saw it a lot in the regular season too. But if it's happening in the playoffs, despite how they closed the year, you can't ignore it, and something had to give. But it's not just Vogel and it's not just Bud. You have to hope that the mix in this locker room is just frankly better than it was. And maybe getting rid of the coach helps that. But I think if you're the Suns, you have to hope that guys like Mason Plumlee and Tyus Jones and obviously, the big three gelling better in year 2. And maybe even like Monte Morris and Royce O'Neal, guys that are going to play slightly smaller roles in that, although I guess Plumlee will too, can just be the right mix. I think that has to happen because Vogel wasn't on the court. Vogel wasn't choosing to run bad offense or, kind of freeze and get deer in the headlights energy in those games. I'm sure there was a game plan. It's up to him to get the most out of his players, but it's also up to the players to give a lot more energy and effort and stick-to-itiveness than they did, right? But it's also about Bud when it comes to offense. I think we have seen structure from Bud when it comes to playing faster and developing quick-hitting actions that utilize spacing and connection between the best players on a team to get guys in their spots and let a team's strengths guide them, right? And I just don't think that was happening last year or in the playoffs. So that should help. I will say that, look, we can talk about a point guard, and I can say Tyus Jones's name as many times as I want here. I don't believe that this series was lost because of a lack of organization on the part of the Suns offense. I really don't think that's what happened here. All right. Their turnovers were, I mentioned that they had too many live ball turnovers because they were running bad offense. And maybe you believe that Tyus Jones can just the fact of his presence alone will make that better. I tend to not really think that's how basketball works, but pure and simple, their number of turnovers compared to how many Minnesota had really wasn't that out of whack. It wasn't, their pace was a problem. Yes. But that's because Minnesota was just owning that end, that's category of the game so much with second chance points that made the Suns have to take the ball out from under the net, and Minnesota's own control of playing fast that I don't think, if they had a point guard, they would have been able to match that. I just don't think that that's really true. Maybe you're 10 to 15% better in all these categories with the point guard, but I just don't really buy that's why this series went the way that it did. So it's going to have to come down to some of that coaching stuff and the best three players on this team just buying in more and playing off of each other better. What really did sink this ship, if you're looking at personnel and position, was the center spot. Drew Eubanks was an abomination, got benched, and left the team. Jusuf Nurkic played maybe the worst 4 games of his entire season for the Suns in the biggest spot, trying to go one-on-one with Gobert when it didn't make sense, not involved as a playmaker, defensively making mistakes, over-helping, not reading the floor, and not providing much resistance at the basket as a result of just being out of position and having little awareness for what was going on. He played terribly and couldn't grab a rebound, or let's say couldn't keep the Wolves off the glass. That might be a better way to put it rather than saying, what is Nurkic going to grab 30 rebounds a game? We know it's a group effort, but he definitely wasn't making a dent in the damage that Minnesota was able to do on that end. And that's a huge concern because, yes, the Suns have 2 new options at center. I think Mason Plumlee's better than Drew Eubanks. I think Oso Ighodaro has some things about him that could allow him to get on the court and make an impact, but I don't look at any of that and say their rebounding problems have been solved. They're still going to be undersized overall, and neither of those centers are, they're not going to play together with Nurkic, so it's kind of a moot point. Their centers could be the best rebounders in the NBA, and it wouldn't go all the way toward fixing that issue. And that's, it's still a problem. Them being undersized overall and them having an average center group at best, that hasn't changed, and that is still going to hurt them. Now, I look at things that could get better, that maybe they weren't even doing poorly, or that, it could just, as a domino effect, just be better about the team and allow them to be more competitive come next April. 2 of those come to mind in particular. One, they're deeper, so they're not going to be as overmatched by a deep team like Minnesota again. They're going to take more threes, so Minnesota's not a great three-point shooting team, so it wasn't like they were getting outshot every night by the Wolves. But imagine a Suns team that actually took advantage of how many good shooters it had and was able to counteract. Okay, yeah, Minnesota's winning the possession game. They're getting offensive rebounds. They're playing faster than us. They're, creating more live ball turnovers. However, what we can do, and I'm speaking from the standpoint of the Suns being in that, in that huddle, we're going to come out and bomb threes, and we're going to, outshoot them by enough that we're making up for some of our deficiencies. That's what being a good 3-point shooting team can do. It can either make you almost unbeatable like it does with Boston, or it can make you less beatable given that you are going to have your own holes as a team, right? And so that'll be one. And then I do think, like, yes, having a point guard or not having a point guard was not the issue in this series. But the best case that I can make for having a point guard from a Suns standpoint is not necessarily even what a point guard does. It is that you will be getting the best version of Booker, Beal, and Durant, and getting those players to play off of each other better, right? That's what I've said all along. If you can get a point guard, the goal for any big three, the goal for this big three is to maximize how those three players play off of each other, make each other better, and are better than the sum of their parts with the other guys on the team. If you believe, and I could be convinced that Tyus Jones and Monte Morris, just by getting those guys back into their comfort zone and not having to be the top playmakers on a team, get closer to being the best versions of themselves and the best version of how they can be as a trio, then that's just going to change a lot of what I said at the beginning of this podcast when it comes to Ant outplaying Book and KD, Beal having an atrocious series, and all of those things. If those guys are all just 10, 15% better and have chemistry, I mean, what are we talking about? A whole different team. That's not really related to this series, but obviously it's a big part of why they lost this series. And if it's different this year, they're going to be more competitive and more treated more seriously in every category. So we just have to see and hope that it does. That'll wrap us up. Fun episode. Really have been waiting all off season to do that one. I just needed to have time to watch back 3 freaking basketball games. So there you go. Fun one. Hope you enjoyed it. Back Wednesday. We'll have another episode with Stephen Perjone Garner by the end of the week. And again, big announcement coming. So if you check in and you're like, I don't know about this show, you're going to like this announcement. And hopefully it makes the show even better. So then you'll want to hit subscribe. So you might as well just do it now so you don't miss it. Enjoy your Monday. Enjoy your Tuesday. I'll talk to you guys Wednesday.